Firstly, apologies, especially to our colleagues in the foreign media contingent who weren't allowed to participate in the media tour of the plant. We had some accreditation problems with the State Security Agency, and I must take responsibility for that. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, and this media briefing was arranged at very short notice yesterday, so we couldn't get everything in place. The panel on this side, I'll start with Mr. Pagamane Khadebe, who's the Group CEO for Eskom. Next to him, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Public Enterprises. Then the Honorable Chairperson, Mr. Jabu Mabuza, Chair of the Eskom Board. He is a very honorable chair, I'm told. On this side, I'll start with Mr. Ian Morrison. He is the convener of a technical review panel that the board and the minister announced on the 4th of March. And their job is to help with an independent evaluation of the operations and the technical stuff at power plants and make recommendations both to the board and the minister. So Mr. Morrison is one of two conveners. Next to him is Ms. Pendile Muketsi. She's another member of the technical review panel. And then lastly, Professor Anton Eberhard. He was appointed as the chair of the Presidential Sustainability Task Team on Eskom. That was announced in December last year. Professor Eberhard's team already made some recommendations that the President incorporated, for example, in his State of the Nation address earlier this year, but he will also be here to answer questions from the media and address specific issues that may arise. I can now hand over to Minister Gordhan, who will address you. Also, the presentation is before you. Once we are done with these proceedings, I can distribute it more broadly to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thought we'll do a quick survey. How many of you want to apply for jobs here? 1, 2. That's a great pity, because I think this is a very important installation in the country, which ensures that both in respect of the economy and in respect of households, we have some level of normality, notwithstanding some of the key issues that we've had to deal with in the recent past. We've said to you and the South African public before that we will be very frank and factual in terms of where we find ourselves in relation to electricity supply in the country. And so once again, in line with the undertaking that we gave some 14 days ago, we are back to you and the South African public to say where do we stand on this issue, which has both worried all of us, but also to some extent disrupted the lives of people at robots or at home in respect of cooking, during load shedding, or in small businesses that depend upon electricity as an important fact of life in order to do their business, or to in major enterprises like mines and factories as well. So to all of them, once again, we are very apologetic for where we find ourselves, but as we will show you today, we believe we have a clear roadmap to a better situation into the future, both in the short term and in the medium term as well. And once you see what we have to say, there's going to be some very hard work for our colleagues in Eskom to ensure that we have delivery on the plans that we put forward to you, some of which is already being acted upon. The other point I want to underline, because I believe some of you might have been unfamiliar with what are the requirements of a national key point. A national key point is defined as such by a piece of legislation in South Africa. So it's a law which says what sorts of facilities like a power station are considered to be national key points. What flows from that is that there are particular security requirements, precisely because this is a national key point. And those security requirements were communicated to you this morning. You can't photograph certain things, you can't video certain things. And so I think we need to tell the South African public through yourselves that this is a very important installation. Eskom has to be absolutely rigorous in applying the security standards that the legislation requires it to. And all of you, I hope, will now have a better understanding of why some of the measures that were taken were indeed taken. And if there's any questions around that, we can answer that at a later point in time. The overview that we want to present to you amongst ourselves today is good news. It is telling us that our objective still remains a singularly important one, which is that we want to supply electricity to businesses and households and anybody else who's connected to the grid in a predictable way and in a way in which provides certainty at all levels of our society. Achieving that objective is, of course, something that's going to be a journey, but today we are in a position to map out what does that journey actually look like and what are the steps that we are going to take, particularly as the Eskom staff, to whom we are very grateful for the hard work that they do in facilities like the one that you are at today, in order to give comfort that electricity will be supplied as and when required. Since we last met and reported to you, we have a better understanding of the challenges, but also, more importantly, the solutions to those challenges as well than we had at that point in time. The establishment of the Eskom or the technical review team has been absolutely important in this regard. I know on the last occasion some of you said you have so many task teams, what do they do, how do they add value? Well, the key value that this task team, as you will see in a moment, has added is that these are engineers who've actually worked with power plants, some of them for a very long period of time. They have a very close understanding of each of the operations that the video was trying to explain to you a moment ago, and are in a much better position from an objective and outside point of view to tell all of us, whether it's the shareholder, whether it's the board or the management or the Eskom team, what are the problems as they see them, some of which will be familiar to the Eskom team, and some of which will be brought into sharper focus for the Eskom team as well. So they've served a singularly important role in sharpening our understanding of what needs to be done to get better performance from the power plants that we have as part of the Eskom fleet. Their work is not yet complete, so they've just provided us with a quick briefing, some of which we will share with you. They probably require another week or two in order to complete the work that they've done. But arising from work done in Eskom, the work done by the presidential team, and the work done by this technical review team, we can today demonstrate to you that we have a winter plan, because Eskom considers winter to have started from the 1st of May, and essentially the month of May is used to plan what needs to happen between June and the end of August. So that's the key winter period. So the winter plan would mean how many megawatts are usually required in terms of electricity by the country as a whole. How will we manage what we've explained to you as outages before in order to ensure that we have the maximum number of watts available, megawatts, as part of the winter plan. But secondly, we can also indicate to you what the next 9 months are going to look like, and how both the winter plan and the 9-month plan, if you want to call it that takes us to December this year, lays the basis for a more sustainable situation as far as the longer term period is concerned as well. Clearly, the plans are nice to have, as I'm sure many of you will observe, and many of you will also say we've had many plans before. So the key point here is both the plan, but also the discipline and the rigor that is going to be required in order to ensure that implementation of the plan occurs. And in this regard, an important culture change needs to happen within Eskom, where increased levels of accountability and consequence management is going to be key. In other words, if you promise that X will be done in Y time, and if it is not done in that particular time frame, and it impacts negatively on energy supply, then there must be consequences for the people involved in the non-delivery in terms of the milestones that have been set. But an important new component which Eskom has been implementing in previous load shedding incidents is the amount of electricity that is used in South Africa. And today we want to make an appeal both to yourselves but also to the public that we do everything possible, and there are many ideas around, to reduce the We have as our aim that there should be no load shedding from this point onwards. But that is an aim. To get to that aim, we have to execute our plans and execute them at 110%, not even 100%. So that will take a bit of time to get going. But the other indication that we want to give the South African public, which also creates room for optimism and hope, is that if there is load shedding, and we'll show you how the Eskom team has arrived at some of these numbers, at the most we will see level 1 load shedding on a few occasions between now and at least the end of August, and then we'll have greater certainty. So in sum, we are saying we have a better understanding of the issues. Secondly, we have a clear 9-month plan and a winter plan, which are critical periods in the life of both the economy and the households in South Africa. Thirdly, that there needs to be a much more disciplined and rigorous approach to implementing plans on the Eskom side, with greater accountability and consequence management for non-delivery on the milestones that we've actually agreed upon. Fourthly, that we need public participation and public support, not only so that we can reduce the use of electricity, but reducing the use of electricity also helps in fighting the negative effects of climate change as well. So more efficient use of energy is a practice that many countries in the world have begun to engage in a lot more than we might have in the South African situation. So what are our objectives for the rest of this year? As I said earlier on, to be transparent and frank with South Africans, and there's a lot going around, particularly because we are in an election season, to suggest that there are secrets being hidden somewhere. So let me make it absolutely clear. There's nothing to hide, except that this is a key point, so you couldn't take some photographs and videos in certain places. We have absolutely nothing to hide. And the one appeal that one can make, and I want to make, is that political parties should not electioneer on the basis of load shedding. Leave that as a national interest issue, and all of us should be asking the question, how can I contribute to creating an environment where the right amount of electricity is generated and supplied to South Africans as they need them? And making suggestions to the contrary in respect of frankness is both incorrect on the one hand, but misleading to the public on the other hand. Of course, we do live in the age of fake news and lots of other phenomena that you are more familiar with than I am. And so we don't want to play with the sentiments of the public. We want to give them facts as they are, so that they understand both the positive side of what we've been able to do and achieve and intend to do, but also understand, as we will point out to you in a very transparent way, what are some of the risks that we have accompanying the plans that we put forward to you. Secondly, ensure energy security in the country. Thirdly, we want to impact positively on the economy, because sustaining the right kind of energy supply ensures that we are able to can do them later. So let me make that point again. That ensuring the right kind of supply of electricity actually ensures that electricity does not act as a constraint in the near future on economic growth. And this is absolutely critical in the kind of situation that our economy finds itself in, and indeed our fiscus as well. So we want mines to continue to produce, factories to continue to manufacture, retailers to do their business, small businesses to thrive as they would normally do, and to ensure that the benefits of growth accrue to all South Africans as well. Similarly, we can understand that when there's interruptions on electricity supply, you have traffic log jams, you have problems, as I said earlier, in the households in relation to cooking and other basic things that we've become used to, or children studying with their lights on and being able to do their homework as well. We understand that. And what we want to do is to return to that comfort level sooner rather than later in terms of our plans. The fifth and sixth points that you see there are the ones I've made already. That we do understand better the root causes of some of the problems that we have. And secondly, and much more importantly, we want a greater deal of urgency and accountability in the way in which our plans are actually executed. So having said that, as our collective objectives, there are some issues that flow from the previous briefing that we gave, when, if you recall, we had issues around coal and diesel and so on. So we thought before we get into the plans, we should give you an update of what progress has been made on some of the issues that were acting as constraints on the previous occasion. We will also take you into confidence about what happened during that period, between the 14th of March and the 23rd of March, when we had different levels of load shedding, but certainly 4 days of level 4 load shedding as well, what caused it, how it happened, and how we recovered from that process as well. But before we get there, let me bring Mr. Mabuza in, and he'll take you through the next set of issues that arise in the next slide.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, sorry. Minister, just an update. Pleased to say our coal stockpiles has been improved. We are by and large meeting some of our agreed requirements. The quality, we have remained very rigorous in ensuring that we use the right appropriate coal for that particular power station. We had diesel issues when we last met. We've been able to secure diesel, and we've been able to be more forward planning in our procurement and sourcing of diesel. We did point out that some of our procurement processes are challenging and not very much appropriate for a crisis and an emergency situation. We have looked into our current legislative framework, Minister. There is no need to be seeking to go outside of that. Within the legislated framework, within the PFMA, there are mechanisms in which we can fast track, and this has to be seen to be distinct from emergency sourcing, can fast track the procurement of goods and services. On the people issues, we have got Paramani and his team have been working with the HR community to readdress the issue of relinking, making sure that people that are closest to the issues have got the necessary authority and are empowered with the resultant accountability, and indeed, as you referred, Minister, to take the consequences of not doing what they said they would do. Really, the emphasis is getting the right people at the right places, doing the right thing. The restructuring process, that is the separation, the ring fencing, continues, and we continue to engage with all affected stakeholders on the subject. On the unions, job losses and privatization, as we had indicated, Minister, this has been a very big part of our cost areas that we had to focus on, and within the constraints of the President's stated line that there should be no retrenchment, we're looking at other ways of dealing with our staffing and appropriate staffing, areas like natural attrition, looking at various voluntary separation arrangements, but that based on not losing the skills that we need to lose. There has to be restated that there is no discussion. We cannot be talking about who should own Eskom. We can choose many things, but we can't choose our owners. So that the President has undertaken that there is no plan by the owners of Eskom, which is government and on behalf of South Africa, to privatize that. The financial issues, many of the assumptions that have been made, we now know. The assumptions we had on tariff, we now know what has been the tariff decision. That known has yielded certain gaps in our assumed revenue. So the tariff gaps that we have, that has now materialized, we've been back to NESA to ask a particular question that relates to how they sought to treat in the allowable asset-based calculation. They sought to treat the government's 23 billion that was mentioned in budget in an unusual way, so to speak. We've been back to NESA to ask them to explain how did they arrive at that treatment of that particular line item. NESA came back to say they will answer that question when they release their reasons for their decisions. So we await that. We also have become now more aware that our cost, on the cost side, our assumptions on cost has been impacted by and large by the extensive use of diesel, amongst other things that we had to now embark. Therefore, we are continuously looking at various alternative mechanisms of addressing our funding issues. So this is something that occupies both the ministries and the departments of National Treasury and DPE, and indeed our Treasury people at Eskom. On the new builds status, we did say we were reviewing the cost and benefit analysis of continuing or otherwise on Medupi and Kusile. It's been a question that has been raised by a number of people, so it was important that we did apply our minds on that. We have done the exercise. We have concluded that the costs of not continuing is not going to be met by the benefit of continuing. So there are bigger socio-economic prices to pay. There is also a lot of equipment and inputs that have already been brought on site, which may need a big canvas to cover the stuff as we decide not to proceed. But indeed, there doesn't seem to be an answer to provide for the gap of energy that Medupi and Kusile should provide. Therefore, even if you were to come back later and decide to restart, the cost of doing that would be that much expensive. So the decision is we will continue to fix those design problems that we find on both, hopefully complete these in a manner that they would produce the intended output. So that's that from my side, Minister. Then I would ask Bernard to talk about the other system operator related issues.
Good afternoon. I'm sitting here as the systems operator, and my role is to balance the grid. It's all dependent on available resources. I am not responsible for generation or distribution or demand. All I do is to make sure that the grid remain in balance at all times. The grid is the transmission network and all the power that flows through it from the different generation technologies, which is what you see on the screen there, to us as consumers and the customers. In the next few slides, I'll also show you how the load or the demand is distributed across the country. So first, let me start with, if we can go back to the previous slide, just to elaborate that we have about 46,500 megawatts of installed capacity in the country. What you don't see here is renewables. We've got about 4,000 megawatts of renewables. And the reason we didn't include it is because it's very erratic. So if I add renewables, you will think we have 50,000 megawatts. We do not have 50,000 megawatts all the time. But yes, we do have on average about 2,000 megawatts available during the day, which drops to about 1,400 or 1,000, depending on the amount of wind that is available at the time after evening. So the other point to highlight here is that beside the different technologies that you see, the problems that Eskom is experiencing is centered around coal fleet. You will see we've got 36,000 megawatts of coal, and we have had, and that's when we had stage 4 load shedding, we have had up to 13,000 megawatts of that capacity not available, which leaves us with about 24,000 megawatts. And that means we have to be highly dependent on the other resources. If you can go down, Quebec is performing very well, the nuclear power station. Hydro is also performing very well. If you can go back to the previous slide. The gas turbines, this is what we call the diesels. Unfortunately, they are not designed to run continuously because of cost. One of the reasons we had to load shed was because we ran out of diesel in the country. And that is why diesel is also very important to have strategies. I think we'll talk about the strategies around diesel later on. The imports from Mozambique, it also appears in the reasons why we had to load shed up to stage 4 load shedding. We're all aware of the cyclone Idai. It did affect the 2 lines that are bringing power from Mozambique. We subsequently managed to get the second line, the 1 line back, and the work is continuing to get the second line back sometime in May. Then we also have 1,000 megawatts of the IPP OCGTs, which is also in the mix. So that is the total installed capacity on the generation side. Next slide. Okay, so the next slide is just showing our transmission grid. The reason we show this is firstly to make you realize how vast our grid is that we're balancing. And also you must understand the load distribution across the provinces, with Gauteng taking a big chunk, about 1/3 of the total demand in the country is consumed in Gauteng. And then the rest is distributed across the provinces. You can see the different colors are just indicating the voltage levels. The purple color is our highest voltage level. We have recently strengthened that supply to the Cape. So the Cape network is now very robust, and the challenges that we used to have don't exist anymore. So we can actually supply all the power that's required in the Cape using our 765 backbone network. The green is the 400 kV, which also spans across the country as well. Another point to highlight, because of the vast nature of our country, the transmission line, we have 32,000 kilometers. Not many countries have that kind of transmission network in one country. Next slide. So the next slide is what we've done is just to try and show you how big our grid is. We just superimpose the same grid on the European map. We cover up to 7 countries in terms of the spans of the grid. And the other challenge that you should understand is that because South Africa, it's almost an island when you talk electrically. We cannot depend on our neighbors, unlike a lot of countries that you see on the screen there. So when we run short of power, unfortunately, we can't call on our neighbors to help us. Most of them rely on us in terms of the exports that we send to them continuously. And there's a line as well from Mozambique, which we are thankful that we're getting that power given the constraints that we have currently. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what happened between the 14th and the 23rd of March? Unfortunately, we have been running with a very high UCLF of about 10,000 megawatts. Unplanned outages. Thank you. You can see I'm an engineer by profession, so the minister has to remind me. Okay, so UCLF is unplanned outages. So that number has been running around, averaging around 10,000 megawatts. Sometime we touch 11,000 megawatts. Unfortunately, that week of the 13th of March, it didn't all happen on the same day. We started losing a lot of units because of what we call the boiler tube leak. So the video that you saw earlier on elaborated on that. Because of the high number of the boiler tube leak, normally we get about 10 to 12 boiler tube leak units failures a month. We had 16 in 1 week. The whole of month we had 18 boiler tube leaks, which is way out of the norm. So that was the first issue. The second one, because of the same reason, we ran diesel, and by Thursday we had depleted all the diesel that we had in stock. Our tanks, at best, we can manage 3 days if we're running continuously. Then the last point is obviously the unfortunate situation of Idai in Mozambique, which led to a loss of the 1,200 megawatts. So the 1,200 megawatts combined with the 13,000 is what really broke the camel's back. And we ended up moving away from stage 2 on Thursday, stage 2 on Friday. On Saturday, we went to stage 4, which continued until the next Thursday, where we started to recover. That is the Thursday where we had the first line coming back, bringing us 890 megawatts. And we recovered some diesel during that time and the pump storage water as well. So from that point on Thursday, we then reduced to stage 2, which continued until Saturday when load shedding ended, fortunately. So that's basically what happened with the load shedding that we experienced. So just to emphasize, my role as the system operator is to make sure I do not lose the grid. So all the actions that we take, including load shedding, is to make sure we do not compromise grid security. Because the impact of that, it's much more severe. Even with stage 4 load shedding, we're still able to supply more than 80% of the demand in the country. Thank you, Minister.
So, that was just to give you some background on issues arising from the previous exchanges with you. Secondly, to very transparently explain what happened during that week, because there were lots of questions. How did you peak at level 4 load shedding and then suddenly there's no load shedding? That's the explanation, and we can interrogate that further if you want. But the key issue now is not what might have happened in the past. The question is, and the challenge for all of us is, how do we manage the future and manage the future in a way in which we can say to South Africans, we have a handle on this issue and we have a plan, and more importantly, we are going to make a number of changes in habits and processes that will ensure that the plan is implemented effectively. So between Mr. Mabuza and myself, and Bernard will cover the next few slides. So on this one, we are saying, what's our overall objective for the winter season as I described it? Remember, May is the period where you warm up the engine, so to speak, and June to the end of August is the key period in which winter dynamics actually kick in. And there's various adjustments that Eskom undertakes in order to ensure the optimal supply of electricity during this period. I'll give you one example. There's a standard requirement that some 2,000 megawatts is always kept in reserve. Sometimes in winter, they manage that in a different way. Normally, we want 5,000 megawatts in planned outages. In other words, on a planned and systematic basis, units like the ones that you've just seen taken off production, maintenance work is done, and they return. During the winter months, that's handled on a slightly different basis so that more plants are actually available. So our objective is to improve the energy availability factor. In other words, the plants must perform a lot more efficiently than they have up to this point in time. Secondly, as I said earlier on, ideally to stop load shedding altogether, and we'll come back to this in a moment. If at all it happens, it will happen for a certain number of days over this particular period. We want to execute proper maintenance to reduce plant breakdowns, and this is where the technical review team has been extremely helpful. How do we, if you like, upgrade and ensure a better quality of maintenance and maintenance planning so that we don't get into difficulties as far as maintaining the plant on time and within cost is concerned. But the fourth objective is to get public participation in this process through ensuring that we all use electricity a lot more prudently and save wherever we can. And we'll give you examples of that in a moment as well. We have been, as we admitted on the last occasion, less than optimal in terms of effective and regular communication, and that will also, within the next 10 days or so, be upgraded so that we have more systematic and regular communication from Eskom so that the public and various important stakeholders know what is actually going on. So the scenarios for winter 2019, scenario 1, all right, so Bernard will join me. So between him and I will do some tango. As I introduce the slide. So scenario 1 is where there's no load shedding. And in this instance, we will ensure that unplanned outages, that is unexpected and unanticipated breakdowns or tripping of the plant, is kept to less than 9,500 megawatts. And that planned outages, as I said earlier on, is within this range of 3,000 to 5,000 megawatts. So we add some flexibility in that area. Scenario 2 is where, for one reason or another, the unplanned outages go above 9,500. And in that instance, according to the planning that has been undertaken by Eskom, which Bernard will explain in a moment, a maximum of 26 days of only stage 1 load shedding will occur throughout this whole 5-month period. So not in any one month, it stretches across. Today was day 1 of the 26 days, by the way, so it's 25 days, and there's no load shedding today. So that hopefully we can sustain the good news in that particular regard. But let Bernard add his wisdom and experience in this regard.
Just to explain how we get to these scenarios, this winter we allowed generation to prioritize maintenance that is required, that is critical, and then we work with available capacity that's left for us to meet the demand, and then we put that in the mix together with all the emergency resources, and we're talking diesel, we're talking pump storage water, and see how we can meet the demand. So we on our side, we forecast the demand for the period that we're talking about. And then we take whatever capacity is available from Eskom, from the IPPs, and then we look at under different scenarios, which the Minister has already mentioned, how does the system look like? So based on that analysis, this is what we are looking at. UCLF, I did mention that we did touch 13,000 when we had stage 4 load shedding. There are some measures which helped us to bring it down, including some units that have been brought back that have been on long-term outages, and that's why you see we are confident that we should be able to stay most of the time within the 9.5 UCLF. But I'll give you an example of yesterday, and then we did mention that we will come back. We agree that we'll come back and give you the plan beyond August, going into September to the end of the year. Okay, so how are we going to stay within the 9,500? And these measures that you see here may or may not happen but this is the stuff that we have in the back pocket as the system operator to see how we can manage the situation. So we're expecting these 2 units that have been out for a long time to come back. This is the message that we got from Generation, and those are the committed dates. We still have the 2 units that are not commercial between Medupi and Kusile that can give us 1,200 megawatts if they are running. I must emphasize these units are still being tested and commissioned. So when we do have them, obviously that helps us manage the situation. Every effort is being made to bring that unit 3 at Kusile back into synchronization, for the first time, into synchronization before the end of April. Obviously that will make a difference as and when it runs. And a lot of effort has been put in place to make sure that we don't end up in the same situation when it comes to diesel stocks, and the CE will probably add on that later on. And then the other advantage with winter is that because of the cooler weather conditions, our plant tend to perform better in winter than in summer. Just to give you an example, Matimba, which is in Lephalale, you can lose up to 1,000 megawatts on a bad day because of heat that they cannot produce. So that, to us, it's also a plus. And then lastly, we're expecting Korabasa to also increase the 300 megawatts that we're not getting currently because of the one line that is down. They committed to bring that line back sometime in May. And obviously every megawatt count in winter, so we're looking forward to that as well. So if all these measures pan out, quite confident that there may be those odd days where things get out of control, and I can see my Generation colleagues nodding. So there will still be those days, and this is where the 26 days comes from. Okay, so this one is just trying to explain. So I mentioned the 26 days. So in our plan, yesterday was the first day of the 26 days. The system was supposed to be very tight if we were in that scenario that is above 9,500 megawatts. Fortunately, sorry, let me rather start to the beginning. Okay, the top left corner, it's exactly the table that we showed earlier on, which shows the installed capacity. And then on the right-hand side, that graph here, it's our daily demand profile. So it shows you how we met the demand yesterday, starting with black coal. It's just a coincidence that we have a black color for coal. And then the yellow is a nuclear, and then pink is the import from Korabasa. So these are the different technologies. That's PV, which unfortunately disappears as we head into the evening peak, and that is the blue is the wind, and then the CSP at the top. So that's how we met the demand yesterday, and we're able to avoid ending up in that one of the 26 days. But what is more important is the performance of our plant. Instead of the 9.5 that we planned for, we ended up with 8.5. So we actually had 1,000 megawatts in the back pocket on that 9,500 scenario of unplanned breakages. So that's basically how we...
It's not in the Louis Vuitton bag. In your back pocket is fine.
Minister, this one is in my back pocket. Okay, so that's basically how we met the demand yesterday. You can see how much capacity from each of the technologies. So coal gave us 24,273 at the time. Quebec performed very well as well. So was the Eskom Hydro. So we only had about 4 diesel generators out of the 20 that we had. So we still had 16 open cycle gas turbines in the back pocket. And then the imports, we got about 1,009, but normally we get about 1,200 if both lines are available. Nothing from the IPP. And we still have some of our customers, and this is at a fee, it's not load shedding. Some of our customers who bid in, we have a product in in the market where they can bid in to be curtailed, especially during the peak period between 5 and 7 p.m. So yesterday we had about 400 megawatts available in that market.
Yeah, Minister, you did cover these points. Really is to restate that our objective between now and the end of the calendar year is to continuously improve the energy availability factor. Every effort to stop load shedding is being put into place. In the event we do find ourselves in the unanticipated space, that should at least be to limit the load shedding to stage 1. We'll continue to maintain rigorously and continue to have operations on the one side and maintenance on the other side, have sufficient service delivery, service level arrangements so that maintenance should deliver as per their commitment to operations. We join you, Minister, and encourage the public to participate in energy savings initiatives. And also, we also intend to ensure continuously to be effective and to communicate regularly in as transparent, sincere, and as honest a way with all the stakeholders as is possible. Paramani can deal with the next 2 slides, Minister, if it's okay with you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think the Minister has already articulated one of our biggest challenges, and that is that Eskom, the challenges or the problem is not about the plans, but it's about the execution. And he has already indicated that there will be consequence management, which we're looking forward to. However, what is important is what the Chair highlighted was the winter period. But we have a plan that goes up until December. And amongst those things that we make sure that we avoid load shedding as much as possible, as listed here in. The first one is, of course, the Letabo Unit 5 here, which you are closer to. We are planning to bring that back in December, and we have already spoken to the National Treasury to decide on the flows going forward, how will this be managed. That's the first thing. But the second thing that is important is that we can save, and this is very conservative, about 500 megawatts from engagement with intensive energy users. And we have already spoken to them, and they have shown a great deal of interest in working with us with that regard. Then there's a drive that was very successful previously when we went through exactly the same problems. And that was the power, that was a public participation. At best, public participation saved about 1,000 megawatts. So we've been conservative. And we think if we go to the media and we talk about the importance, as the Minister has already alluded to, of what we as individuals can do in South Africa to save electricity. We can save anything between 100 megawatts to about 500 megawatts. But we will continue to execute the 9-point plan, which is something that was discussed last time. And it forms the basis of where we're going to as an entity. What is different, what we haven't done all these years that has been done this year, is that normally the plant maintenance in winter decreases to about 3,000 megawatts or so. But for this year, we're going to maintain that plant maintenance at about 5,000 or so to deal with the challenges that I've already alluded to. Over and above that, the board has approved the spending of 45 billion rands over the next 5 years on maintenance. That is not just generation. It also includes transmission and distribution. This will help us to avoid in transmission and distribution some of the challenges that we are facing in generation. And lastly, we have also set aside 4.5 billion to go and resuscitate over and above the budget, the Medupe and Gusile. We now have a SWAT team We know what are the challenges, and they will be looking into that. And lastly, the use of diesel. We have learned a great deal during the past couple of months, and we have also learned that relying on contracts with one or two refineries doesn't help. So we have looked at other players that can help us should and if a situation happens where there is a demand for more diesel than what is available. With the next slide, it just shows, every time we've been talking about the new bill, how far what have been the challenges, and what's the turnaround. We have spent almost 260 billion, and I think South Africans need to know more what has been achieved. Medupi already has 3 commercialized units, and Kusile has 1. While we have challenges in that the performance is at best at about 50% or so, but the SWAT team that we have brought in, together with the boiler server team, will try and enhance the performance of this. The most positive thing that has come out of this is that within the next 2 months, we will have commercialized 2 units. It's Kusile 2 and Medupi 2. And the advantage is they are already operating. And out of all the units that we have had before, they have shown quite a great deal of performance. Combined, they give us roughly about 1,002 megawatts. That's been one of the best performing units that we have had in the new build. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we mentioned earlier on the technical review team. Mr. Ian Morrison is co-convener of the team. The other convener is Sakani Mtombeni. He is somewhere overseas at the moment. So Mr. Morrison is representing both of them. But there will be a quick briefing from a person who's actually got direct experience of working and managing a power station. It's Pindile Muketsi. So she'll take you through the next few slides, and I'll help her from here.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister.
Maybe, if you don't mind, just give them some of your CV, if you like. Who are you? What is your actual experience in this field? I'm sure they'll be very interested.
Greetings to everyone. It's Pindile Sindane Muketsi speaking. I joined Eskom in 2003 in the chemistry section. I worked as a technician there and was promoted to be a line manager in chemical services. Further progressed to being an operating group manager, and I have worked with Medupi in terms of preparing for operational readiness. Hence, we haven't seen much issues in terms of the operational side. Moving on, I moved into Komati Power Station. Actually, at Medupi, I was promoted to technical plant manager, managing engineering, maintenance, and operating. I was further moved to Komati Power Station, which is where I ended my career with Eskom in 2017. And I am glad to be back. I am glad to be part of the team that is here to say it can be done. The challenges are there, the problems are there, but it can be done given time. After the appointment of the technical team, on the 8th of March, we convened as a team, new faces towards each other, not knowing each other, but coming with different expertise and experiences. We set up a plan to meet the minister's 4 weeks that he gave us. And in that plan, we decided that we are going to do in-person reviews at power stations to gain that personal experience and experience what the teams are going through at the power stations. And the second part of the review was to do desktop reviews where we analyze Eskom's data. We went as far as 15 years ago to understand where Eskom is coming from, where did the problem start, and to formulate solutions out of that. And the last part that we did in terms of these reviews is to meet different teams, support services at head office, support engineers, and all other teams that are working off-site. Now, what we looked at with these 3 areas that we visited was to check the plant capabilities, the plant efficiencies, and the plant reliability. We focused on those 3 things so that we can come back and say, yes, it can be done, or no, it can't be done. In terms of the plant capabilities, if I can take you back to the screen, as you can see from 2005, Eskom was a giant and they achieved the 80% EAF. Actually, their target at that time was 97.3, 90% available, 7% on planned maintenance, 3% on unexpected failures. And that was the great time. We can see that around 2011, they started to see a drop which drastically went down to around 2014, 2015. And our focus was to check that what happened there. And the details report to the minister will contain that. However, if you check in 2017, there was a comeback. Our concern is, why did we then drop? But looking at this picture, we safely said this can be done because a power plant is designed to run for 15 years consistently good, and there is no way that you can then lose performance and capability within that 15 years if you are maintaining your plant correctly and you are running your plant correctly. Just briefly, this is just what we extracted as executive summary from the report which will be submitted to the minister in detail. We said we need to place strong leadership at all key positions. You have key positions at station which are managing engineering, maintenance, and operating. If you have weaknesses there, it doesn't matter how strong the team is. It just drops the station down. So this is the recommendation that we have placed in the report. Part of it is to appoint power station managers with full authority. We have stations running with acting power station managers. It's not easy to make firm decisions when you are acting. Yes, a strong person will do that, but it doesn't give any other person those powers. And a person who's acting hasn't been assessed, hasn't been passed through that they can do this job. Appointment of those power station managers should happen as quick as possible and fill critical positions. A power station is like running an aeroplane. You need a pilot. It doesn't matter how many engineers you have, how strong your CEO and how strong your management is. If you don't have a pilot, that flight will not take off. Now, we found that we have vacancies in those critical positions, which they call them unit controllers. And the report to the minister has details on where those vacancies are and how critical they are. Improve the root cause analysis capabilities and execute promptly. In terms of leadership and people, which are the first 3 bullets that I touched on, you also need to make sure that you run that plant so efficiently that if anything breaks, you know exactly what happened and what went wrong within a few hours, and you then go into root cause analysis within 7 days. This is not coming from the technical team. It's part of the standards that must be kept within Eskom. It has always been like that. We need to see improvement on that. Within 7 days, know exactly what went wrong and correct it. Next slide. We then went on after capabilities. We told you Eskom has the capability to achieve 80% EAF. We then looked at how well is the plant run on the plant efficiencies. We have the 15 years data, but in terms of the contributing factors to the failures of Eskom or the efficiencies of Eskom, we only looked at the previous financial year, which ended a few days ago. For the purpose of this presentation, we're only presenting to you the problems that were there during the time of load shedding in March, which is when we hit stage 4 for consecutive days. If you look at what we have found, is that yes, we had boiler tube leaks, and I cannot go into details in terms of how many they were, but I can tell you that they made up about 25% of the problems that were during load shedding. 65% of the problems were on the ID fence, which is in part of your draft group. This is the part that we need to focus on. yes, we're focusing on boiler tube leaks. It's one thing you manage, it's one thing you can put on the table and say it impacts you this big. But these are minor load losses. When put together, they make a huge impact and they exceed the boiler tube leak impact. We also looked at the number of trips on that day. They were not that much, so the issue is on the yellow COI defense. In terms of the recommendations, or in terms of what needs to be done, is that we need to strongly focus on overall process optimization, because your draft group is purely dependent on your process optimization and quick responses in terms of the challenges that you have or any breakdowns that you have. And the other point which still needs to be validated by Eskom is to review the DUVA 3 recommendations on boiler oxygen levels without compromising safety. Following the DUVA 3 incident, it was recommended that the boilers should run at slightly higher levels of oxygen. It was implemented across all stations. IT fan capabilities are impacted big time by that. Not only by the oxygen, there are other factors involved. But we see this as a quick win in terms of dealing with each plant specifically according to its own requirements and not make a blanket approach. We have data to prove that, and we have 1 or 2 stations that have already started with that review. Track partial load losses with daily targets based on each station. This is a focus that each station needs to look at. You might run without boiler tube leaks, but you might be running with those small minor load losses that make up a big impact into the system. This, we also have a detailed chapter on it in terms of how this should be done and how it should be tracked, and creates daily leading indicators as opposed to being responsive. In terms of plant reliability, we checked why is Eskom's plants not reliable. This is the graph I showed you earlier, but now we plugged in maintenance. That orange strip is reflecting maintenance on what happened in terms of maintenance within Eskom. You can see where they started losing the plot. It was mostly on an unexpected breakdown. Now this, I won't talk much on it because we are still diving deep in terms of what has been happening on maintenance, but the quick things that we picked up is that we need to adhere to outage planning guidelines. There are guidelines in terms of outage planning to ensure a success in outages, and in this we are strongly recommending a multi-year budget on projects, on anything that needs to be implemented during outages. We are also recommending that the outage budget be released and approved at 20-4. That means 24 months before you go into the outage, because most of the problems we found were not technical per se, but were on readiness to implement outages. So by the time you switch off that unit, you need to be able to do the work and have all the necessary equipment. I won't touch on the other bullets, but we need to re-engineer the procurement process for agility. If anybody is stealing, deal with them and not tighten the process. So that procurement process needs to be challenged strongly, and it needs to enable the technical teams, it needs to enable people to do their jobs and to have quick responses, have the spares that are required. And in a nutshell, that's basically what will be entailed in the report in detail. And it's important that we highlight that within a week or so, that report will be ready. I would like to hand over to Ian just to close it out.
So thanks to my colleague, I think you've heard in a nutshell some of the things we've achieved. We visited this station on the 13th of March, and since then we've done 6 or 7 more stations, including Madupi. We've talked about the deep dives. I think we've given you a feel of where we need to look with the management team in Eskom. But in this room, guys, we need to think about something else. Morale in Eskom is not in a good shape. It's very national in this country to bash Eskom. I think the time has come to start helping people that are slaving themselves, to help them understand that we actually appreciate what they're doing. I don't think many of you understand the trouble that some of these dedicated people are going to. Long hours, You saw the size of the station. It's a complex animal. So my appeal to the press is to start giving some credit where it's due. Give these guys credit. They really are trying their best, and continual Eskom bashing is not helping us. I think, so having said that, we sort of covered where the team's going. We've got a lot of work to finish. There's a lot of deep dive amongst data. Some of my colleagues are sitting here. Young Lawazi there just loves diving into data, and he will carry on doing that until he's old. Mr. Minister, I think that's enough from this team.
Oh.
What have you missed?
Okay, sorry, I missed the last slide on new builds. We also visited the new builds, only Medupi, not Kusile, but the problems we picked up are more or less common in the plant. And I won't touch on our findings there, but we are saying Medupi, Kusile, update your maintenance strategies for the milling plants and the fabric filter plant. You find that a plant is designed to do X, but once you start running that plant, you need to review how you had planned to deal with it. We cannot go into detail in terms of what we found in there, but the engineers at Medupi are on it, and we have confidence that they understand exactly what needs to be done. Put in place appropriate maintenance contracts for all plants. And let's not run the new builds like it has been there for some time, but let's run it as efficiently as we can with maintenance on time, spot on. And we need to improve in terms of optimization. We have 2 units which will be going commercial in May, and we believe that optimization on those units was focused on, and you have heard the CEO saying those are the 2 best running units. And lastly, I would like to state that there was a study done in terms of the new build. When we compare the 2 plants to the plants globally across the fleet in the world, Medupi and Kusile are not that bad. Yet problems are there, and they will be sorted out. Thank you.
Perhaps I could just add something I think people forget, and there's a lot of focus on the new build that apparently is not performing. If we were to remember our history, all stations coming into operation have this kind of teething problems. We've all conveniently forgotten the Majubas, the Mutlers, the Kendalls, the Tatukas, all had teething problems in the first few years. So we actually have to give the new build space, settle down, sort out some of their defects, optimize maintenance, optimize operations, and then we should have a world-class asset. Thank you, Minister.
Before I go there, everybody's talking about this young man who's interested in data. Lwazi, Kokwana, you want to stand up, just show them the suit you're wearing at least. And maybe if you get to the mic, just explain to them what's the importance of data in this context.
Good afternoon, everybody. So when we got into Eskom, we noticed an amazing amount of data that Eskom has. I'll make an example. If you look at all the fleet that Bindile has just shown in their different performances, each time it produces or it performs below the standard, automatically it generates a notification that allows the controller, and it allows the controller to bring in the reason as to why is the unit running low. That happens automatically. So over the last 15 years that Bindile had mentioned, we've got more than 3 million of these notifications that we're analyzing. Now they tell us the detail by unit, by power station, by equipment type. So there's that set of data, which we call plant performance data. In addition to that, we've got the job cards. So where an engineer has to go and fix and do maintenance on the plant, there's an electronic job card system where the engineer goes down, finds out what's wrong, resolves what's wrong, and records it. So you've got the data that shows, again, we've looked at more than 3 million of these records where for all of the plants. So you say, what are the trends that are happening here? I'll make an example. It looks like big data, but if you compress it, you say, for an example, all of these 3 million notifications, what days of the month do they happen? Are they around payday, for an example? Or what days in the week are they happening? Out of the 7 days, you're able to pick up very interesting and insightful trends just on that data. And then you've got the financial data where every spend that has happened, it's linked to a specific plant. Typically, one would look at the management accounts. If you look at the management account, they give you the aggregated data, which says your spend in maintenance is going up. What it doesn't tell when you go down to the GL or the general ledger, it tells you that spend specific to that equipment. That's what then explodes it to over 20 million data sets if you look in the last 15 years. If you look at that detail, you're able to pick up, for an example, where the spend is higher, but it's not spread across the different equipments within the plant. It's because it's going to, for an example, major failures in one area. So we are able to look at the data and say, yes, maintenance went up, but it doesn't really sprinkle up. So it's like, for example, where in your car you lose a gearbox and you have a major spend. It doesn't mean your car is well maintained because you spent that much. It's only on that failure. So that's the kind of data analysis we do. We put together all of these things. There's a lot of hypotheses about the people, where we're saying, is the people at Eskom not doing well, or is it the quality of the maintenance? We use the same data, different data sets to try and extrapolate that. For an example, where we say, yes, maintenance was done, yes, an outage was done. What is the performance of the plant immediately after the maintenance? So that's the kind of extrapolation that we do as a technical review team. So we can come back with technical and scientific results to our thesis that will come out in a week or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Excellent. So there's a bit of science to this. It's not just hearsay and intuition. So the next slide, as we round up, is on the question of asking the South African public, whether in business or elsewhere at home, to help themselves and help South Africa, and as Mr. Morrison said, help Eskom as well at this time to reduce demand. And on the screen you can see the use of air conditioning, the use of geysers, the use of pool pumps, switching off non-essential lighting. And you'll find that many business premises, for example, after 5 o'clock until the next morning, keep their lights on inside the offices. Now, there was a period when, in fact, all of that didn't happen, or it was muted in some kind of way. So those are all immediate doable things that both in businesses and at home we could actually do. That little block there is very interesting. I'm not sure how many of you participated in Earth Hour, so we won't quiz you right now, but that's an interesting statistic. Even with, if you like, partial participation in Earth Hour on Saturday, 554 megawatts were saved. Right, when various people switched off the lights, so to speak, in solidarity. So that's a very good example of how public participation and discrete use of electricity can in fact help us at the end of the day. Now, we won't be able to complete this without telling you that, of course, there's risks to the plans that we have as well. We'll mitigate these risks, we'll manage them carefully, we'll monitor each of them carefully, but in the spirit of transparency, we need to tell you and the public what they are. So there could be new trips or breakdowns, like the ones that we've had before, whether it's the fan or the tubes. There are execution risks. The point that we've made repeatedly, having a plan is one thing, putting it into practice with the diligence, discipline, and energy that is required is quite another. But more importantly, on the one hand, we need to congratulate all those people in Eskom who are doing a fantastic job, even under very difficult circumstances. And yet, on the other hand, we can help them by holding each other more accountable within the Eskom context. And where they are unruly elements, then consequence management must follow as well, so that we get the optimum performance that we actually require. There could be weather events like the one that we saw recently in Mozambique that could also have a disruptive effect, and a possible delay in the line 2 of Kohoro Bassa coming back as well. But before I round up, we've all been familiar with the fact that the President in early January, late December, appointed a sustainability task team, and the chair of the task team was Professor Anton Eberhardt, who's well known in energy circles, both here and overseas. And he's a real expert, amongst others. There's lots of fake experts that are walking around at the moment as well. So I want to give him a short opportunity to explain some of their findings, but to underline the fact that their report is not completed yet. They're in the process of completing it, handing it to the President, who will then determine when and how it becomes public. So, Prof.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister has asked me to be very brief and only to give a sort of very high-level overview. So just a reminder, we were appointed a team of 6 in mid-December. We delivered an interim report to the President at the end of January. And as the Minister says, we're currently in the process of completing that. We'll submit that by the end of April, and that may be made public. So the President asked us essentially to do 3 things: to interrogate, firstly, Eskom's ability and capability to provide a secure and adequate electricity supply, so the whole security of electricity supply issue. He asked us to interrogate the issue of Eskom's financial sustainability. And thirdly, and I think this was very interesting, he said, look, we might and we're likely to solve the technical problems, and hopefully we will sort out Eskom's short-term financial difficulties, but how can we stop Eskom coming back again in 3 or 4 or 5 years for another bailout? So can we put the sector on a sustainable path going forward, and in particular respond to the kind of energy transition that's happening globally, and think about new business models and perhaps even restructuring for Eskom. So let me just summarize very briefly those 3 areas. So electricity security of supply. I think we all now in this room have a broad understanding of some of the reasons for load shedding, and you've heard them here today. Old kit breaks down more often. The new kit has design and construction defects. We haven't done enough maintenance at particular times. Poor coal quality, lack of diesel, etc., etc. But one of the issues which really struck us as the President's task team when we went into Eskom, and we had, by the way, excellent cooperation from both the Chair and the Executive and his team in providing data, was that probably the core issue, the core difficulty and challenge in Eskom at the moment is the issue of skills and capabilities. And Pandile highlighted this issue of leadership and people. And I want to emphasize a point that the Minister has made repeatedly over the last period, that we should not underestimate the impacts of state capture and SOE capture in hollowing out skills. Extraordinary disruption and undermining of governance systems at board level and at management level. But what we've seen in our investigations, just how deep that has run through the organization and the extent to which skills have been hollowed out, the best people left, some of those who've been distracted by rent-seeking activities as well. And so this technical team that we've heard now reporting, one of our members on our team, Dr. Tsakani Ntombeni, is a co-convener with Ian on this, and it's an opportunity to drill down in much more detail than we were able to do. So sometimes people ask the respective roles of these teams. I think this is taking forward one area and really doing a deep dive in a very valuable one. There's a second aspect to this security of supply issue, which in a sense is beyond Eskom, because if Eskom's availability of plant is declining and we are experiencing or have the threat of load shedding, then we also need to add new capacity to the system, and we need to start moving urgently to do that. So there are a whole set of recommendations in our report to the President around doing that. So the urgency of promulgating an updated IRP, launching a new IPP procurement process to accelerate investment that will complement Eskom's generation, and then freeing up the market for small-scale generation less than 10 megawatts. There's a huge pipeline of investment and potential innovation that could make a massive difference if we made it easier or perhaps even exempted the requirements for small plant to have generation licenses or to simplify the registration process. So that's the first area, issue of security of supply. The second area is financial sustainability. And I think we also now realize, many of us, just how serious these challenges are. We've heard a bit about it today, but in essence, Eskom is not generating enough cash to cover its operations and to service its debt. In other words, what it's actually been doing in recent times is borrowing more money to pay the principal and the interest on its existing debt. So its debt levels are too high, they're unsustainable, and something has to give. Within our President's task team, we developed and commissioned an independent financial model. It's a forward-looking model. So we were able to assess in some detail the kind of financial interventions that are necessary to put Eskom on a sustainable path. And what became absolutely clear is no single intervention will solve the problem. So there's not a silver bullet, but there are three key interventions that could put Eskom on a sustainable footing. So the first, obviously, is generating more net revenue or more cash, and that has two components. Essentially, it's compressing costs on the one hand, and it's trying to get the revenue up. And we've seen the NERSA tariff increases. The analysis that we've done on our team and through our financial model would indicate that those tariff levels on their own are not sufficient to restore Eskom's financial sustainability. So that brings us to the second issue. So the one is cash, it's the income statement side of the equation. The other is debt on the balance sheet. And again, something has to give there. So we've seen in the budget speech, 23 billion rand a year, right? Not one-off, have been provisions have been made. But again, our financial modeling show that on its own, with those tariff levels that we have, will not be sufficient. And so there are discussions at the moment. A series of mechanisms are being explored around financial restructuring, some kind of debt relief structure, and hopefully there will be some announcements on this soon. So those are two more revenue or more cash, dealing with the balance sheet and debt, but we also need to deal with the cost of debt, because what's happening is as Eskom retires debt, right, pays its principal, it's retiring its cheapest debt when it still had a credit rating 10 notches higher than it is now. In 10 years, we've seen Eskom's credit rating drop 10 notches. It used to be 3 notches into investment grade, it's 7 into junk territory. Its debt is very, very expensive. And so some kind of new kind of innovative financing facility is something that the team is looking at, a blended finance facility that could include some concessionary a component, maybe linked to climate financing, with other sources, could actually make a huge difference. So if we had those three together, we could see potentially Eskom returning to a more sustainable financial position. And then the third area, and it was really 2/3 of our terms of reference from the President, were around the medium and long-term sustainability of Eskom. In other words, as it responds to these extraordinary innovations that are happening globally around an energy transition, how is Eskom responding to be a more sustainable business? How will it get out of this potential utility death spiral? Is it able to develop a new business model? Should there be restructuring? And you would have seen that the recommendations of our team to establish 3 separate entities in Eskom was adopted and accepted by the Minister and the Cabinet, and there were announcements in the State of the Nation address and in the budget speech itself. So 3 entities, initial focus being on creating an independent grid and system operator. And I know there's been a lot of articles and papers in the paper by people with opinions on this, saying, will it make a difference? The view of the task team is that this is a transformational change for the future. It doesn't necessarily resolve all the immediate problems, but it puts the sector on a different trajectory in two respects. Running a generation business is very different to running a distribution business. Distribution business is customer-oriented, customer-facing. Generation is the kind of things that we've been hearing today, the kind of things that you've seen in your visit of Letaba. So separating these businesses out will have a very different kind of management focus, much more transparency around costs and potential to get efficiencies. But there's a second benefit, and I guess this is the most transformational, because if you have an independent grid with the system operator, and as the President said in his State of the Nation address, you combine with that entity also the planning and the procurement and the contracting functions, then you're creating a stable, transparent platform for contracting in a fair basis and a transparent basis, least cost power. In other words, we will accelerate more investment into the sector and that intergeneration, least cost generation that will complement the efforts that Eskom is making itself. I think I'll end there. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. So to round up, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that, as the Prof pointed out, the visit to the plant gave you a reality check. How is electricity actually produced? What are the complexities that Eskom staff, as Mr. Morrison said, has to deal with? And where are some of the problems that you hear about actually arising from? The second point I want to emphasize once again is the key point issue, and that we need to make ourselves more aware that securing a key point is an absolute national priority, and we hope that you understand why that is necessary and why you have to be part of that process as well. Thirdly, that we do have, as we put to you, a plan for both the winter season and beyond, and with that will come a more disciplined and rigorous execution culture or implementation culture with the appropriate levels of accountability and consequence management that will enable even the current hardworking staff to do better. And as the technical review team has pointed out, there are a number of measures that we can take within the next few weeks that will strengthen the hand of people working at power plants, so that they're in a better position to manage contingencies and challenges that they are faced with right where they are, and have the technical support in the power plant through the right personnel being appointed. But importantly, the head office then begins to play a different kind of role in supporting them as well. Demand management, one must emphasize, is going to be a key component of the plan as we go forward. South Africans have done it before. They did extremely well during that particular period. Let's do it again in this particular period. And as has been pointed out, all of this leads into the question of long-term sustainability, both in terms of structure, finance, and the operations of Eskom, so that we can say we have done the work in the short period that we have an opportunity to do this for future generations who can have the benefit of energy security as well. So back to you, Mr. Lakke.
Thank you, Minister, and the rest of the team. Just for your record purposes, Bernard will address you on some of the technical slides. His surname is Magoro. He's the Eskom Group Manager or Group Executive for Systems Operations. We'll now go to questions by show of hands, please. 1, 2 next to you, Antoinette, and 3, Alex. Then we'll move to 4, 5, 6, and that will be the first round. So we're starting with Antoinette, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Please identify yourselves and the institution that you're from. Thank you.
Antoinette Slabbert from Rapport. Mr. Mabuza, I'm astonished that you say that you've now realized that the PFMA is adequate, that you don't need emergency procedures outside of the PFMA. are you really telling me that the Eskom procurement division did not know the PFMA until now? In fact, Mr. Molefe told us that they did emergency procedure coal procurement from 2008, and they continue doing it. They never reverted to normal procurement. So how does it work that an entity like Eskom has a whole procurement section and they don't know that? And in fact, if I understand Ms. Moketsi correctly, procurement also seems to be at the root of some of the load shedding problems, the problems at the power plants. What will be the consequences for the procurement section? And then just another question, can you confirm that the IPP OCGTs, that the cost of running them is about 26 Rand per kilowatt hour? And how does the cost of that compare to Eskom's own OCGTs? And then just the last question for Mr. Morrison. You're telling us today that the problems at Medupi and Kusile are not that bad, that they're actually in line with new plant elsewhere in the world. It's not us as the media who came with the idea that there's something major, some major problem at Medupi and Kusile. It was Eskom who told us that. It was this Eskom board and this Eskom management. So who should we believe? The one day you're telling us there's a major issue at Medupi and Kusile, the contractors are in the wrong, there are design flaws, and the next day you're telling us it's not that bad, it compares well. Please help us, who do we believe?
Paul Burko with Bloomberg News. I realize that we're dwelling on sort of the immediate issues, but does Eskom, with some of the delays that have been experienced in the renewable program, and we still haven't seen an IRP, does Eskom have a plan for the longer term, for maybe the next 10 to 20 years? Are we also going to find that we're in a generation, a gap of inadequate generation at that point as well? Thank you.
Alex. Hi, Alex Winning from Reuters News Agency. The first question is that a lot of the things that you talked about to do with maintenance, these seem to be very costly. When you look at your MYPV4 application, you had a cost forecast for the current financial year, which just started, of 56 billion Rand, I believe. Do you still think you can keep within that with all of these additional repairs and maintenance work? And the second question is the very interesting comment by Professor Eberhard just now around additional financial relief for Eskom. Could you give us a bit more detail about that? And is the question of the PIC taking on a portion of Eskom's debt off the table completely, or is that something that you're still looking at as a form of debt relief? And the climate financing sounded very like something that World Bank would offer. Are you talking about World Bank financing? Thank you.
We'll move over to either one.
Creamer Engineering News. Just for the technical task team, you say that Eskom could move back to an energy availability factor of 80%. That hasn't been true for so long, and it's not factored in either into the NERSA application at all. Isn't it more realistic to say it's going to be a lower but more stable energy availability factor? So if you could just unpack that a little bit more, because it's a major gap that gets left, and that gap, as Professor Eberhard said, could be filled by IPPs or by rooftop SSEGs. Secondly, the 500 megawatts that you're looking to secure from the energy intensive user group, is this a incentivized system? And can you outline how you're going to do that? Is it demand market participation as you've done in the past, or is this national service? Thirdly, can you give us an insight into how you'll speed up procurement without bending the rules of the PFMA? And where are the very hot topics or the hot issues that need to be procured urgently, and how will you do that? And have you got the boiler health contract secured? Fourthly, when you say there's going to be no privatization and then the National Treasury puts out in the budget review that there's going to be the injection of a strategic equity partner into the transmission system operator company. You can see where the messages get muddled. So please explain to us how a strategic equity partner in the grid company is not privatization. And also if Professor Eberhard could explain why a strategic equity partner in the grid company is the right place to have a strategic equity partner when all the problems lie in the generation part of the business. And finally, does the sustainability task team, which is just about to finalize its report, agree with Eskom that not completing Kusile and Dupi is the best route in terms of the least cost energy system going forward? And can the gap be filled without Medupi and Kusile being completed through the different instruments mentioned in your input, Professor Ewa? Thanks.
Kabelo Kumalo from Business Report newspaper. My question is to the Minister. Minister, you mentioned a lot about accountability and consequence management, and you made a firm commitment that you will limit load shedding to stage 1 in the next 5 months, if I got you correctly. So in terms of consequence management, who then do we hold responsible? Should we go to stage 2 or even stage 4? Is it you, is it Mr. Hadebe next to you, or is it Mr. Mabuza? Secondly, the question to Mr. Hadebe. You said you have set aside 4.5 billion to address challenges in Medupi and Kusile. Can you kindly provide me the time frame? Is it in this financial year or is it over the following, let me say, in the medium term? And thirdly, my question is to the technical review team. You said that one of the challenges is that most of the power station managers are acting. Can you give us a number? How many of these people are in active positions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Viram Tila from ENTA. I understand that you've got plans for load shedding over the next 5 to December, in fact. But I just want you to take us into your confidence. When are we most likely to see the end of load shedding as a whole? And then is there any capacity to bring on nuclear at a small scale, seeing that Kuberg is performing well?
Thank you. Lisa, do you have a question? That's the first round. Thank you. Minister and team.
There are a number of questions where numbers are required in response. So IPP and OCGT cost, Mr. Hadebe, you or a member of your team can develop that answer. Maintenance 56 billion in relation to the MYPD, get ready to answer that one. And then 4.5 billion for Medupi and Kusile, the time frames for that allocation. And then we'll handle some of the other questions in sequence. Mr. Mabuza will add to some of what I got to say, but let me see. Antoinette, the point we're making about the PFMA and emergency measures, and the point that Mr. Mabuza is making, is that the PFMA does allow for greater speed in terms of processes. So you can either have a file sitting on your desk for 6 weeks before you simply adapt your signature, or it could be sitting on your desk for 6 days. So if we are less bureaucratic, more efficient, apply our minds very quickly about whether you approve or disapprove, not play games in relation to malfeasance in the procurement process, then the agility that I think the task team is speaking about can in fact happen. We've also consulted with the Auditor General about how, with his approval or the officer's approval, certain things can be done so that the Eskom board and management is not crossing the wrong lines. But the bottom line is that agility and speed of response is required. The emergency that you referred to earlier on was used as a ruse. That's why you have optimum and other problems in terms of supplies. That is why, as the inquiries and forensic investigations into what happened during that period intensify, and the prosecution service gets onto its feet again, I think we're going to see some very interesting things actually emerging, where costs were hugely inflated in order to benefit certain individuals and their families. But more importantly, the word emergency has been invoked during that period, perhaps even now, to take opportunities to engage in malfeasance. So I think we must distinguish between that kind of false emergency, if you like, in order to do improper things, and the agility that we are talking about, where you follow process, but follow it with speed, so that we don't hold up these important things that need to be done, for example, on the maintenance front. If we have the time and if you're interested, the task team can explain to you how a maintenance package is put together. So it's like a plumber going into a household but not going with the right spanner, screwdriver, and whatever else other equipment is required. And then saying, oh, now I forgot my spanner somewhere else. There's a very rigorous and scientific way, I'm learning, so I'm just repeating what they've told me, of putting a package together, planning the maintenance, executing the maintenance, so that time becomes an important factor in the way we do things. Some of these things are not happening on that basis. And of course, the National Treasury are going to be important partners in this process. So no corners are going to be cut in terms of governance and in terms of following the law, which is what Mr. Mabuza actually indicated. In relation to the point you're making to Mr. Morrison, I think you might want to draw a distinction, and you can add if he wants to later, between, if you like, some of the structural issues, which you quite correctly point out have been mentioned, in terms of the design of the boiler, the problems of the net, and they were listed, by the way, in the fourth slide that you have, very transparently. But what we're trying to do now is to talk about, well, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to maintain and operationalize that plant so that you can get greater efficiencies from it immediately, notwithstanding those design difficulties. So I think those two different elements that you might want to distinguish between as you get into this particular inquiry. Paul's question about the IRP and our longer-term plans at Eskom. Well, Eskom will be dependent upon the IRP, particularly in relation to the energy mix. And this addresses the ENCA question about nuclear as well. So what is the mix that we are providing for? And IRPs are supposed to be there for a reasonably long period of time, 10 years, for example. If you want a lecture on what are some of the changes that are happening in the energy market, we have a professor here, if you have the patience to listen, because you've got to take those changes into account, both for the purposes of the IRP, but importantly for the purposes of planning within Eskom as well. But the objective, it should be very clear, that in the first instance we need to cross the winter period and the rest of this year. Secondly, in doing so, we must leave do the groundwork for sustainability into the future, as the plants are at the moment, and at the same time begin to anticipate and implement whatever the IRP provides for in the longer term, 3 to 5 years, and then beyond that as well. So I don't think it's either or. It's a question of following this in a phased way, and as all the interlinkages between the IRP and Eskom planning emerges, you will see the plans beginning to emerge as well. Just to remind the ENCA colleague and yourself as well, there are elections on the 8th of May, so somebody else could be sitting here and talking to you after that as well. So we are in a democracy after all. The maintenance question from Alex will be handled by the Eskom people. The additional financial relief, and whether the PIC would be involved or not, and whether the World Bank will be involved or not, the approach that we've used until now is firstly sort out any immediate liquidity challenges that Eskom has. And we were able to do that, for example, in the last week of March. Secondly is to, now that we are in the new financial year, there needs to be some work done by the Treasury in order to get the 23 billion rands allocation moving in terms of cash flow. And there will be interactions between Treasury and Eskom to work out what the cash flow requirements are and what are the cash flow possibilities on the Treasury side, and to synchronize those two processes. Thirdly, it's the question of the debt. And all I want to leave it at this stage, because we don't want the marketplace to buzz around the wrong ideas, is to say that a variety of options are before us, and serious consideration is being given to all of them at the highest level in government. Once we're ready and have finessed the package, we will let you know either before the elections or soon thereafter, depending on how quickly we can resolve some of these issues. The 80% EAF and any gap that might actually arise, Mr. Creamer, maybe the technical team can address that as well, or some of the Eskom colleagues. The manner in which you obtain the 500 megawatts can also be addressed by them. The speed of procurement, well, I gave you the more general proposition that we're working with, and there would be, as part of that, as you correctly point out, various contracts and subcontracts that will have to be entered into, or that are existing and already in place, or need to be put through some review and renewal process where that is appropriate as well. So they can respond to any specifics in relation to the boiler health issue at the end of the day. The word privatization has different meanings for different people. So if you are 100% owned as a government entity, and somebody, an outside player comes in and lends you money, then you would say, no, you're getting the private sector to participate. On the other hand, privatization for many of us means that the entity's control is in private hands. Right? So you've got to draw a distinction between giving control of an entity to the private hands, or it remaining 100% in control of government, or there is a minority stakeholder that gets involved in the form of what we are, in our language, calling the strategic equity partner. The strategic equity partner in government language is not intended to be above 49%. So we're not privatizing in that sense. And the point I think that the Prof was making was that there are different types of lenders who will have an interest in different components of Eskom at different stages. So for example, if by a miracle, in 2 months' time, we sort out generation's debt problems, some people might be interested in one or other investment on the generation side. Equally, South Africa's distribution side is a very complex area. Some of it is done by Eskom, some of it is done by municipalities. If that, there was the REDS plan, if you remember, sometime in the past, if it's revived in one form or another, it might become, or even in terms of municipal infrastructure, in terms of electricity reticulation, many municipalities actually require to refurbish, to maintain, and to renew many of their much of the distribution infrastructure as well. So there could be investment in those areas as well. So I hope I've clarified this privatization issue, which is also used as part of the fake news as well, that this whole separation into 3 entities is all about privatization or job losses. And to some of the important stakeholders with whom we've had conversations in the recent past, we've very emphatically clarified where we stand on those issues, and fake news mustn't become popular news, and the understanding of the South African public, which is one appeal that we want to make to you as well. The question, I think Mr. Mabuza will tackle this again, but he said already earlier on that in respect of Medupi and Kusile, there's no reverse gear that's available. But he can expand on that as they go, because the board has given consideration to that particular issue. Mr. Kumaro, it's management's job. I hope it's in ENCA, in your independent newspapers as well. It's your job to deliver what you promised to deliver. right? It's not the director's job to do that. So it's management's job to deliver the plans that they've put to us. We might have amended it in one or other way to add more rigor and science to it if necessary. But the change in culture, the change in the energy that is put into implementation is what is required of management and staff within Eskom. And it's the board's job, ideally, to make sure that they actually deliver. But because of the circumstances we find ourselves in at the moment, some of us take a more activist approach to some of these things as well. We'll come back to your point about 4.5 billion rands for Medupi and Kusile, and also your question around power station managers and how many are in an acting position. But what you should also know in a very transparent way, as Professor Everhart, who did very intensive work on the impact of state capture on Eskom. That's another lecture the professor can give you as well. One of the areas that was impacted quite seriously is at the power station level, where good power station managers were removed and all sorts of changes actually happened. And the Eskom board and management is in the this one has a reverse gear. So those changes which were negative and impacted in an improper way on Eskom's performance, those changes are going to be reversed, and some of the recommendations from the experts will now be implemented. And as you heard them, this power station here requires a strong leader, a strong technical person with the right kind of technical managers to support that person, and with all the vacancies filled so that they can do a proper job to serve South Africa as far as what is going on here is concerned. End of load shedding, I think we said to you very clearly that between now and the end of August, we hope to have no load shedding at all. In the unfortunate event that some catastrophe of one sort or another takes place, then you might get level 1 load shedding, which is a far cry from the level 4 that we have experienced, and far less disruptive to South Africans as well. And hopefully as we get some of these recommendations implemented and get the execution of these recommendations into the serious zone, we might actually present a very different scenario to you in a few months' time as well. Your point on nuclear depends on what the IRP comes up with. So let me call in Mr. Mabuza, see what he wants to come in with, and then there's some colleagues.
Yeah, Minister, I think the point really we're making, Antoinette, is we're the first to advance the argument that we need to find other quicker ways, because time is of essence, to address the problems that we face at Eskom. We went on to say it just cannot be used in normal routine, that somebody must come up one day and think of an idea and then has to go through a process, ask for tenders and go through, and go to Treasury. If it takes 6 weeks, take 6 weeks. We've looked into the PFMA, as the Minister said. We've engaged the Attorney General. Within the current, the Auditor, not Attorney General yet, the Auditor General, within the constraints of the law, we are using processes to delay when procedures, and I'm using these two words advisedly, when procedures do not require to be that cumbersome. Indeed, if it takes a scheduled board meeting to take 3 months to get a schedule of authority for a board's oversight function, not approving tender, a board's oversight function to meet, the board can set up a specific committee in the board that could meet sooner. Even within the office of the Chief Procurement Officer, there are mechanisms in National Treasury that there may well be officials in National Treasury that can be able to meet at shorter notices to evaluate what is being asked for by the entity. And thirdly, within the procedures that you can use sole sourcing under certain circumstances. The third other area, if the supplier you are already wanting to use does currently supply another state-owned entity, you do not. So there are mechanisms that can be less bureaucratic to be able to be agile, given that speed would be of essence in a crisis mode that we find ourselves. That is the point we are making. We are going further to say we are not, whatever others did, we are not proposing emergency procurement. The other comment, and Paramani and the system operator can respond. Just to point out, the issue of pricing is one that is governed in the power purchase agreement. And you'd appreciate those issues. We as Eskom are not able to know. And I'm not sure if the single buyer should be telling us information that is competitive. Let me just make that point as to what it would cost. To your question about, is it 26 rand? I don't know. I don't know. If he wants to tell you, we would love to know how competitive we are. That's the comment I just wanted to pass. On Medupi and Gusile, we have had questions ranging from, is it not cheaper to stop right now than to continue? Even within the board, certain members of the board have asked that we do an exercise of just questioning this, that if we were to stop now, what would it cost? So the cost-benefit analysis is, given that they are at a point where they are almost complete, and in rand sense, rand terms, it would cost around 18 billion each to complete. We estimate that the contractual and legal costs and penalties we may have to incur to stop by stopping is another 8 billion rand, give or take. So then you can say it would cost us 24 billion rand. But then you must ask yourself, what can you buy for 24 billion that you are saving by not continuing? If you look at the pricing that is in the current draft IRP, it would cost you about 39,000 rand per kilowatt. That's what the price is in that draft. So you can buy 600 megawatts. Because the fact that you're stopping this does not mean you don't need that capacity. So you still have to find the capacity. So if you stop this, then you're going to have to build something else. Building something else for 24 billion, what will it get you? That's the cost and benefit analysis we have done. And it's also going to take you between 60 and 66 months to build. The second question we considered, Minister, outside of capacity, was the one in the area of the cost to the national grid. We have been told that to try and keep generating using OCGTs and using diesel, it costs us 50 million rand a day. It would cost 2 billion rand a day to the national economy from load shedding. And I'll let the clever people to calculate the opportunity cost of not doing this. Because you're not going to stop having aging fleet by stopping building new. The aging fleet will continue to age. So we've got to provide for this aging fleet, which is what put us in the space we currently are at. So, Minister, it is through that exercise, just to give you these two cost-benefit analysis, that we have concluded that we would rather spend more time and money to mitigate the risks of completion than to abandon completion.
Thanks, Chair. You have answered the question on the PFME process, the speed with which we can execute on procurement. I will talk about the operational side of things. Eskom is centralized decision making. That is, the manager in the power station, Antoinette, can't take decisions on procurement, let's say on HR, on finance issues. That has to go to Megawatt. And the Megawatt has its own process. We've dealt with that. The relinking that we've been talking about is designed precisely for that, where the decisions that falls within the tower are taken by the manager of the power station. And he gets held accountable for that. Because once we have too many players taking decisions and playing a role, it becomes a challenge to hold people accountable. If we say, you've been late and you are Thomas, as the manager here, you are late, you will say, I'm not responsible for procurement, I'm not responsible for finance, I'm not responsible for HR, or whatever the case might be. But now, the decisions will center around them. I think the chairman has already alluded on the price on the IPPs, and I've been warned by the systems operator that I can't make an announcement on that. I think that's what the chair said too. The issue of maintenance and keeping the CAPEX. The CAPEX will still be sitting at about 45 billion rand or so. But we needed to make a lot of cuts in other areas. It was important that we do so, because if we don't do so, then we will not have met our own survival strategy. What we have decided to do is over the next 3-4 years, Eskom is going to cut costs by an amount of 20 billion. This in itself will help us sustain the business. And I've already indicated that the CAPEX, we're going to spend 4.5 billion. That is more than what was in the budget, going to 9 billion because we are facing severe challenges. But as we are spending more of the side, there'll be more savings on the other side. Then there's is this the use of intensive energy users? Yes, there will be some forms of incentives for them to do so. I think Metupi, Chair and Minister, you have already covered. Let me give the percentage. Metupi is almost 94% done. And Gusile is sitting at about 89, 91%. There's no going back. We just have to correct what we have. The 4.5 billion, I think I've already spoken about it. The acting managers in power stations, there are 8. Out of these 8, 4 of them are acting because the people that were managers in those power stations have been suspended. And they are, once that process has been completed, then decisions will be made. But we are in the process, and we are hoping that the 4 will be appointed in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. The process will have been finalized. I think I've covered, Minister.
Can we have a last round of questions? Lenley, 2, 3, 4. I believe there's people on the line also listening in. Can we hear them?
We have a question from Carol Payton.
Just start again, please.
We have a question from Carol Payton of Business Day.
Okay.
Shall I go ahead, Adrian?
Yes, please.
Hi. In the interest, now that we kind of decided that we're all going to be transparent about Eskom's problems, how much money, what is the shortfall? Now that we've got the tariff increase and we know the 23 billion, what is the shortfall? So if it's debt that needs to be shifted, how much debt? And if it's cash that's needed to service debt, how much cash? Then the second thing is, I mean, what is the delay? And I know, Minister, you don't speak for your colleague, Mr. Adede, but you do speak for government. And government really does need to tell us why there's such a delay with procuring more energy or getting that process urgently on the road. And then thirdly, Minister, I mean, so the sort of worst case scenario he's telling us is that there will be stage 1 load shedding only. If given that the trend that we've seen over the last 6 months, is that a realistic scenario, or is that an election, a pre-election promise scenario? Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. Mike, Lily.
From the Mail and Guardian. Chair, one of the things that Treasury announced in the budget was that this 23 billion that you'd be getting would come with things like a restructuring officer, a chief restructuring officer. I'm quite interested to see where that process is and how you envisage that going forward. I mean, was this just noise being made by the finance minister? Or are there plans in place to actually do that? And then could you just please go through those numbers again on your cost-benefit analysis for Madupi? Apologies, I don't think I understood that very well, but yeah, I would appreciate it if you just go through those again.
Thank you. Lulu Rio from Business Day TV. I think if we could look at affordability, then it's quite obvious that Eskom has been given a lifeline by the BRICS Development Bank, 2.5 billion to fund projects. And if we can look at that, what can we say, what the role of IPPs is now in this new entire equation? What role do IPPs then play?
Roger Lilly from EE Publishers. Mr. Minister, I'd like to just ask you, if I may, again, there's been a lot of speech about keeping people accountable and being transparent, and this is wonderful to hear. Nonetheless, after all this time and all the announcements that have been made in the press and by public officials, still we are still to see people being prosecuted by previous Eskom employees being prosecuted for decisions they made or decisions that were made on their watch. Why is this not happening? Why are we so shy to do this? What are people afraid of? Do these people have things on other people, as has been suggested, or what is really going on?
Linda Mnisi from Newsroom Africa. The technical team rather spoke about low morale among Eskom employees. What is the solution to remedy this? My other question is, part of the concerns were aging infrastructure, and as we walked through the Letabo plant, we noticed quite an old technological system. What are the prospects of getting new technology systems that will improve the efficiency of electricity supply? And my last one is, you've also called for public participation, but given the response on tariff hikes and the effects of load shedding, do you think there's still that willingness from the public to participate in energy saving efforts? Thank you.
The last question here. Thank you.
From MoneyWeb. I think this one would be for the CEO, Mr. Hadebe. I just want to understand, you said that you're planning to bring back 2 more units. So I just want to understand what goes into bringing back a unit online in terms of the cost and the work that goes into it. And after it's back online, I mean, how long do you expect it to be performing adequately in terms of like the time frame that you expect it to be alive for?
Thank you. Minister and team.
So Carol, I'm not standing for president, so we don't have to electioneer. But I think the more important point, Carol, is that this is not an electioneering tactic, if you like. Everyone is entitled to their skepticism. There's a lot of science and hard work that has gone into this over the last 3 months, whether it's the presidential task team, the technical review team, the Eskom staff themselves, our interactions with the Eskom staff. And as you know, putting Eskom on the right kind of sustainable footing has been a priority for government, generally at an SOE level since SONA last year, and more specifically mentioned in SONA this year as well. So, as you'll also understand, Eskom is a major, has a major influence on our fiscus, on our sovereign rating, and generally the health of our economy as well, let alone the health of households that have had various consequences. So we're serious about doing the best we can to avoid load shedding at all, if we can help it, during the winter period and beyond. And if our calculations are right and the hard work is actually put in, then a minimum of 25 days over this period of over 90 or 120 days, or maybe less than that, of stage 1 load shedding. How much is the shortfall? In number, Jabu will give it to you now, but there is definitely a shortfall. There were expectations, as you correctly point out, from the tariff at level A, and it turned out at level B. There was a shortfall in terms of what the Treasury, on behalf of government, could actually inject into Eskom itself. Although 23 billion rands over a 10-year period is not inconsequential. But remember also that there's these alternate mechanisms that are also being worked upon to look into each of those and ensure that the debt burden is a manageable one as far as the debt situation is concerned. Delays in the IPP process, yeah, it does belong to a different ministry, but I think you have a nice way of getting me into a corner here and saying account for it. So all I can say to you is let's find out. I'm not sure what the IPP office has in mind, but one would certainly agree that with the dropping prices that are happening quite phenomenally at the moment, as far as renewables are concerned, we need to seize that opportunity, but also bear in mind that, and this is a mistake we often make, renewables are not the panacea. They don't sort out base load until somebody comes up with the right battery technology. But they can play an important part when availability is there, as Mr. Mahoro pointed out earlier on during the day. But we'll try to find out for you and then come back to you. Lenley, the Chief Restructuring Officer, no, it wasn't just noise, it's quite serious. But what we are trying to do is to work out how do we structure all of these in a context where the plan is to separate Eskom into these three entities: generation, transmission, distribution, which process itself will require the right kind of skill set, which is very different from the normal operational skill set that we have in our own circumstances. And so whether the restructuring officer has a role in, if you like, the transformation of Eskom as a totality, or whether the role is limited to the financial side, is something that we're in discussion with the Treasury on. And ultimately that person will form part of the management structure of Eskom as well. Mr. Mabuza, I think should see you one-on-one because he's got a presentation on the Medupi issue so that we don't take up everybody's time. On the NDB lifeline, that's project finance. It's meant for particular projects that they've clearly defined, but the CEO can give you more details on that. And as far as renewable IPPs are concerned, well, going into the future, they have a very important role, maybe over the next 10 or 20 years. So again, if you want a lecture on it, the prof is here, and we can arrange for that. But the bottom line is, as I said earlier on, we not only need to deal with the immediate contingencies that we are confronted with, but at the same time, we've also got a plan for the next 10 or 20 years and beyond as well. And those processes will work in parallel as administrations go on. Roger, your point about prosecutions. There's nothing about shyness, there's nothing about reluctance, but there is something about state capture. So the prosecution authority itself was captured. And we are in the process, like many other entities in government, of liberating these institutions, putting them under the right kind of leadership, as the President has done, making sure that even within the prosecuting authority, the skills and resources they have are deployed in the right place. So I see an announcement today that Mr. Hofmeyer has been returned to his position as the head of the asset forfeiture unit, which is excellent news because he's an old campaigner in that field, has the skills. And asset forfeiture is where you have a valid case and a court would agree with you, a ready-made instrument to ensure that those who have engaged in malfeasance, whether it's in Eskom, Transnet, SAA, Denel, or any other entity, PRASA included, can have their assets seized. And I'm sure the South African public, like yourself, would want to see some of that and frozen until the prosecution process begins to unfold. But I'm sure that in the next few months we'll see some actions on that front. It's got nothing to do with any reluctance on anybody's part, as far as I'm aware. The question of low morale and the solution to that, I think what we need to do as shareholders, board and management is through this process in the shortest possible time, provide certainty for staff. I think there's a great deal of uncertainty as to what does this restructuring mean, where will I be, do I have a job, what would the nature of that job be. So it's perfectly natural that there would be concerns about people's future in the different contexts. But we want to offer the reassurance, as Mr. Mabuza referred to earlier on, that we are a caring government and that we want to make sure that during the process of change, everybody is accommodated as best we can. And the kind of skills that the technical people have in Eskom are in fact in very high demand. There are different parts of Eskom which have lost very skilled people to foreign lands, and I mentioned that at the last press conference as well. And the more we try to track them down, and these are black and white professionals, the more we find them in different parts of the world, doing work that ideally they should be doing here, and mentoring the younger engineers that we have on our side. The public participation and tariff hikes, from Eskom's management point of view and board point of view, these tariff hikes are an important component together with cost savings to maintain some level of financial sustainability. But these tariff hikes cannot continue forever at the kind of percentages we're talking about. They do have a negative impact on different parts of the business world, the mining industry, the manufacturing industry, let alone households. In the middle classes, the small businesses as well are impacted negatively. So what we are talking about is possibly a year or two window, or less, if we can help it, where we can solve the financial problems of Eskom. Medupi and Kusile is out of the way and reasonably operational, so there's no more money going into it. What's been lost has been lost. But where there's malfeasance, we must recover that money as well, whether it's from a service provider or officials who were around at a particular point in time. And we must bring back tariffs to the level where people can actually say it's affordable for me. But that combined with efficient use and careful use of electricity can in fact provide some relief. So the appeal we're making is a simple one. This is, at this point in time, an important thing that the public needs to participate in. We understand the frustrations, we understand the anger, we know equipment has been damaged at home and in businesses as well. See if your insurance companies actually provide you with cover for the damages that have been caused. Maybe those of you that have a financial skill on your side can come up with ideas from the financial sector as to how they can support people who've been negatively impacted in this particular regard. But please do help, not Eskom, help ourselves. This is about helping South Africa to manage electricity usage in the right kind of way. Ian, I'm not sure whether you want to come in or Opendile on the question of aging infrastructure and the prospects of new technology. I suppose a lot of that is cash dependent at the end of the day, and I don't know if you have some ideas about where we could get money. But apart from that, they can certainly help you in that particular regard. And we'll get one of the technical people to explain to you what outages mean and what does it mean to prepare a unit for return to production. And I'm hoping that we can now finish this press conference in the next few minutes. Yeah.
Minister, just in responding to Carol, the way we have, we being the board and management, have sought to approach this question, really it starts where we look at our revenue minus our cost and the EBITDA that we get, which is less than our debt servicing. You've heard me use the numbers of 170 billion minus 90 or minus 90 minus 50, arriving at about 40 billion in round numbers, with a debt servicing cost of 50 billion in round numbers. So we started from that point, and we then said, what amount of debt are we able to service? That's where this discussion started. So flowing from that, whether you look at that as your debt EBITDA margin or just in absolute rand, we then went to government through the shareholder and made certain proposals of what is it that needs to be done and what is it that we in turn are going to be doing in those things that we can control, being our revenue as much as we can, but more importantly our costs. And we then presented the proposal. We had certain assumptions on revenue. One of the key assumptions we've made on revenue was that we would get tariff increases of 17, 15, and 15. What has happened? We've got increases of 9, 4.4, and 8. The gap between the two, what we had hoped for and what we received, represents 102 billion rand. We then received an RCA refund, which we had asked for 21 billion. We were given 4. So there's a gap of 17 billion. We then had expected 100 billion. We got 69 billion from Treasury with the 23 billion times 3. The difference between 69 and 100 is 31. So if you add 31, 17, and 102, from my Bantu education, you get the 150 billion. So the 150 billion added to what we had assumed you then need, Carol, is 250 billion.
Anybody who's got that in their bank account, please sign a check. The last question is the question of bringing back a unit online. What does it take? Mr. Makoro, or is it Mr. Skipper?
Thanks, Minister. So the question was really, my understanding of it is these 2 units that we refer to as coming back. We have currently 3 units that are on long-term outage, all 3 of them after a major incident. 2 of them will be coming back before the winter plan that we have told you about today. One of them is Kriel Unit 2 and the other one is Matla Unit 5. You asked about the cost of that, a few 100 million rand each. And they will come back in April, Kriel Unit 2, and then in May, Matla Unit 5. The 3rd unit that we refer to as Letabo Unit 5, you might have heard about it today, but that will only come back in December of this year. All 3 of those units, the cost is covered by, or partly covered by insurance, so let's not talk too much about the cost. To bring that unit back, obviously you have to plan your outage, you have to plan the scope of work, you have to get ready with your work teams, exactly what are you going to do, then you have to execute that work, and obviously you have to do quality control to make sure that when the unit comes back, that it stays on load. That's in general. Maybe just one sentence on the question about technology, Ian, if I may. So these power stations are all designed to run between 50 and 60 years. But what you have in there, particularly the control systems and the man-machine interfaces, can't handle that kind of time. So we have in the power station world what we call a half-life refurbishment. where you do big refurbishment, not only of some of the hardware, but certainly of the software, certainly of the man-machine interface and the control systems. And that would be the time when you look at technology improvements to make sure that you don't waste money, but that you invest proper and well. Thanks.
Thank you. New technologies, any takers from that table?
I think on the ability to achieve 80% EAF, there was that question which I think is critical to answer. Based on the study that we have done, you have already 4 units that are achieving the 80%, and you have 5 units that have the potential to achieve within. Okay, I'm told I should mention those stations that are achieving, which is a good thing. You have Kubek, Majuba, Matimba, and Litabo. Actually, Matimba will give you goosebumps in terms of how they operate their plant. And we have then 5 stations that have the potential to achieve this 80% with the correct leadership that has good charisma and technical knowledge. You will achieve that. And then we have 3 stations that can barely achieve this 80%. And these 3 stations will not affect generation's capability to achieve. We already have units that are put on extended cold reserve. Those are the ones that Eskom is sure that they will never be able to achieve, and besides that, they have reached the end of life.
Thank you. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, and it's been a long stretch. Let me remind you again why we're here. One is to give you some background to some of the issues we didn't cover before. Second is to explain to you and the South African public that there's a clear plan both for the winter season and beyond. Thirdly, that you will have a minimum of 25 days of level 1 load shedding, if at all. Fourthly, that both the management and the staff to whom we owe a huge debt will outperform themselves to ensure that we do more than just keep the lights on, but also prepare a sound foundation for the future. Unfortunately, that is not a clean slate. There are those who are Rogers candidates, shall we call them that, for prosecution, who are working hard behind the scenes in order to undermine the good work that's going on here. I'm going to be very transparent about that. And they should be exposed as people who are working against the national interest and people who actually want to do things which don't just harm a few people, they harm the country as a whole. And all South Africans should actually be aware of who these individuals might or might not be, but these kinds of schemes are something that must be exposed and dealt with, and emphatically, in order that the good work that we're trying to do with the various people needs to meet the kind of success that they have. Both the Presidential Task Team and the Technical Review Team but these are people who have volunteered their time free of charge in order to do the extensive work that you've heard. So can I ask you to join me in applauding them? So on that note, and with good wishes to all the Eskom staff and management, thank you very much once again. And we hope that you found the visit to Letabo useful, because it now brings theory into very visual closeness to you, and you understand how, at the beginnings of understanding of how a power plant works. Thank you very much.
Thank you.